Good morning. Welcome to the Bold Vocal. My name is Carissa Schrader, and I'm really happy you have made your way here with me. I'm in the middle of Love Your Larynx, a series all about your voice and how to care for it, how to begin using it in a really authentic way, and basically just everything you need to know about caring for your instrument and being the embodiment of a human instrument. So, one of the fun questions that has come up so far in this is, what the hell is a larynx? And I think a lot of singers know, but maybe you don't. And that led me to realize that, you don't have to be an educated singer in order to sing really well. A lot of people can just do it naturally and have never really learned a lot of the science or the anatomy behind it. But when we take time to learn about the instrument, the way that it functions, and the science behind it, we give ourselves this new level of understanding and control. So by taking the time to learn this stuff, we actually really empower ourselves as singers to be like, oh, well, this condition is happening. And then you can adjust things with kind of a scientific mind and then see what happens in the body as a result and in the vocal tone as a result. So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to share my screen, and this is the download that is available for today. This is your freebie for today's session. It is a vocabulary sheet that has to do with the vocal anatomy. And this isn't super complete. This is basically just kind of the throat to the mask. I didn't really go much down into the lungs or some of the other systems that contribute to singing. This is really just kind of from here to here. Okay, so we'll get into the mind stuff later in the series, and we'll also get into some breath work later in the series. This today is right here at the cross section of the human head and the vocal mechanism. Okay, so sharing screen. Let's put that in full screen. Good. Can you see me? I think this is working. Fantastic. So the question at hand for this series is, what is your larynx? That's where we're starting today. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so this is easier to read. The larynx is the organ at the top of the neck that houses the vocal cords. It's also called your voice box. So basically, loving your larynx is just loving your own voice. The voice box is in control of manipulating pitch and volume during phonation. Phonation is just a fancy word for making noise, for phonating, to make sound. Okay, so while we're making sound, the voice box mechanisms, aka the larynx, they are manipulating pitch and volume. This mechanism is also associated with breathing and protecting the trachea from aspirating food and water during swallowing, during the act of swallowing. So why this is important to know is, one, there's a piece we'll get to later, and it's in the middle of the screen here, called the epiglottis, and it is a leaf-shaped flap of tissue in the throat that closes over the windpipe when we swallow food. So why this is important for singers is that if you engage those muscles to swallow, it's actually going to block your airway. And when you're trying to sing, often when we're going for a high note or something a little scary, we will actually engage those swallow muscles in an attempt to kind of help ourselves get that note out. We tend to kind of bear down and squeeze, and it's actually hurting the ability to do that because that epiglottis is closing over the windpipe, blocking airflow, and creating a sound that is not ideal. So other things to know about the larynx. It houses your vocal cords, which are also called vocal folds, which is the next definition there. There are two bands of muscle inside of the voice box. They're attached to the thyroid cartilage here in the neck. And in man, it would be the Adam's apple. And in fact, while we're talking about the larynx and getting to know it, why don't we go ahead and find it in the body? So I want you to take two fingers. and put it kind of, if you were a man, it'd be right on the Adam's apple, but kind of right in the center of the throat. And if you're not sure, you can just talk or hum a little bit, and you'll feel the vibration right there. It will completely vibrate. So then once you've found them, the larynx, I want you to take a swallow. Okay. So, okay. Did you notice? I'm going to do it again. I get a little closer. Okay. Did you see kind of this stuff, this little muscle here that popped out? And then if you notice with your fingers, the larynx moves up and down when you swallow. Okay. So the larynx is not in a fixed position. It moves and it also tilts forward and backward. And that is to assist in swallowing. And it is also the forward and backward tilt is what controls our pitch. So we'll get into that as we continue here. There are two bands of muscle attached inside the larynx. We call them the vocal cords, and notice it's C-O-R-D-S, not C-H-O-R-D-S. It's not like a chord on the piano. It's like a cord, like a rope, because they are like that. They're tight little tissues that are stretched almost like a guitar string. Okay. So the two bands of muscle inside the voice box that vibrate to make sound, and that happens as air gets passed up through the windpipe and the lungs. That air starts to get disturbed by the very, very fast opening and closing vibrations of the vocal folds. The vocal folds are vibrating anywhere between 250 to up to almost 1,000 cycles per second. So 440 A4 on the piano, 440 open close cycles per second. A hummingbird's wings sit at about 1,000. So depending on how high, it gets faster as you go higher, it gets slower as you go lower, which is going to bring me to my next little bit here, the cricothyroid muscle and the thyroarytenoid muscle. Voice teachers and the voice community, to keep it easy, have shortened these to CT and TA muscle. The CT muscle is the tensor muscle in the larynx that stretches and tenses the cords to control pitch. So when you engage the CT muscle, that larynx tilts, and as the larynx tilts, because these are attached like rubber bands, it pulls them thinner, it stretches them out. So just like when you stretch a rubber band over a shoebox and then you pluck it, the tighter that rubber band gets stretched, the higher the pitch that's going to make. Or just like on a guitar, the skinniest strings make the highest pitch and the thickest strings make the lowest pitch. So this cricothyroid muscle is in control of stretching and thinning and tensing the cords so that they can vibrate more quickly for higher pitch. The thyroarytenoid muscle, the TA muscle, is a thin muscle that actually makes up the body of the vocal cord. So when you look at a diagram, there are these two like thin, broad bands that attach, and those are the TA muscles themselves. And they thicken up and shorten the vocal cords. So they actually like squeeze and shorten the vocal cords. That results in a lower, more warm, robust sound. Later in the lesson over here, we've got vocal registers. And when we get to that, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But the CT and TA muscle, you might experience a little disagreement between them when you are experiencing a break in your voice. So we'll get more into that when we talk about registration. But when you come to that place where it feels like you've kind of hit a ceiling, and then there's this jerky, kind of unpleasant sensation and sound, and then all of a sudden you've got clear notes again, but they're of a different quality. That is vocal registration, and often that is a result of these muscles kind of having a little bit of a power struggle, is probably the best way to say it. Okay, so moving forward, the trachea is the windpipe. That is the tube situated beneath your larynx or your voice box. Remember, the vocal folds live in the larynx. They open and close over the windpipe or the trachea. So the trachea leads up to the larynx, and it's about 4 inches long before it splits in two, and one side leads to each lung. And there's like this bronchial tree thing that happens that's really beautiful. It actually looks like upside down real trees, And that kind of stuff makes me just in awe of the universe, that the lungs look like trees and the trees feed our lungs and the lungs feed the trees, and crazy. Okay, that was my woo-woo moment for the morning in our science lesson. Let's keep going. So the windpipe, what's important to know about the trachea, it sits, let me double check this. Yes, it sits in front of your esophagus, which is here. We'll go ahead to the top here so we can cover this. The esophagus goes to the stomach, and the windpipe, or the trachea, sorry, I was having a little moment with my brain there. The trachea goes to the lungs. So they sit right next to one another in the throat. They're like two tubes that sit right by each other, and they kind of have a similar opening at the top. So couple things that are important to know about that is, one, we already talked about the swallowing sensation. When we swallow, the larynx moves to help massage that food down. There are all these muscles that help us swallow. And when those muscles engage, the epiglottis is going to close over the windpipe to protect us from choking. The other thing that's important to know about the esophagus versus the trachea, and I love this, is when people are always like, oh, I drink a little olive oil before I sing, or I swallow honey because it coats my vocal cords. And that is incorrect. If the honey was coating your vocal cords, or the olive oil was coating your vocal cords, you would indeed be choking on it, because your vocal cords lead to your lungs. And if you've ever had any food or drink end up in your lungs by accident, we call it going down the wrong pipe. It's because those pipes live right beside one another, the esophagus right behind the trachea. It's a very unpleasant situation, and it's not how it's supposed to be. So I would say olive oil and honey, those things could possibly lubricate the articulators and the mouth and the throat a little bit, like the actual pharynx, which we'll get to in just a second, but it's not actually affecting your vocal cords. The only thing that will touch your vocal cords and help you feel elastic and plump and lovely in the voice is steam, because you can aspirate it, you can breathe it, okay? So that being said, if drinking honey or olive oil or whatever makes you feel like your voice works better, then by all means do it, because a lot of that kind of stuff is placebo effect, and the mind is a very powerful tool. I'll spend some more time later in this series talking about the mind and the tricks that it plays on us, and the tricks that we can play on it to make the voice function in different ways. So just keep that in mind, that anything that passes over your cords is only going to be an air or a vapor. So there will be no actual coating of the cords other than steam. All right. The glottis is the part of the larynx consisting of the vocal folds and the opening between them. So the opening is kind of what we call the glottis. And you'll see beneath we have the epiglottis, and I believe the opposite term is called the supraglottis. And then the subglottis is beneath. So subglottis, the epiglottis is the little flap, and then the supraglottis is the area above the opening to the larynx. Mostly it's just important to know that it's related to glottal things. So subglottal pressure, that is the air pressure coming up from the lungs and meeting at the glottis, or the vocal folds and its opening. We have the epiglottis, that's the flap that closes over the opening to protect us from choking. And we also have like glottal attacks. You'll hear people say glottal stop, glottal attack, vocal fry. And we'll talk about that in a minute when we get down to registration. But basically a glottal attack is, and it's like these tiny little air bubbles. You've got the cords closed, but they're not muscled closed. So if you push air through, it's kind of an under-energized sound. And it's something to be aware of, because a lot of people who are newer to singing don't know how to initiate the voice without using a glottal attack. Or Never mind, I'll find someone like you, right? You. It's very poppy. It can be overused. It can be a little irritating on the chords if you use it too much. But the opposite of a glottal attack would be an aspirated onset, like never mind's not a good word for it, but hue, like if you put that little H in there, and then there's a perfect onset that's somewhere in the middle. It's got closure on the chords and not quite an H sound. Hue, right? So moving forward, we have already talked about the epiglottis quite a bit, but again, the importance here to know is that when you're singing, you really want to disengage any swallowing muscles because that's blocking the airflow, and we need air combined with vibration, combined with resonating to create a beautiful tone that is pleasing to listen to and that is also sustainable on your body and instrument. So we want to take every effort to disengage the swallow muscles. So one, you can kind of stick your thumb up in that under chin area if you're feeling like it's engaging and pushing out. And notice when I spread my lips, it engages all this stuff, right? So that's part of the reason we tell you when you're singing not to spread wide. When you're singing E, see all this engagement, right? E is nice and soft and relaxed. So we narrow up some of those vowels. We do things like we shake the head, and we use lip bubbles and all kinds of tricks to teach the body how to disengage the swallow muscles, because they're very well-intentioned muscles. They think they're helping us sing often, and they want to help us hit those high notes and get those big tones out, but really they impede us. They get in our way in a big way. So that's what's important to know about the epiglottis. It engages when you swallow, and it messes up your tone. Okay, it's also, by the way, what makes it really hard to sing while you're crying. If anybody has ever tried to sing at a funeral, or just a song makes you really emotional in the middle and you can't get through to the end, it's because your body is so smart and so amazing that when you start to cry, the epiglottis swells, and so do the vocal folds, in an effort to keep you from choking on your own tears. Your body is trying not to choke on your own damn tears. It's amazing, okay? So moving forward, the pharynx. This is the part of the mouth, the part of the throat, excuse me, behind the mouth and nasal cavities, but above the larynx and esophagus. So basically everything supraglottal above it. And it goes all the way up through the nose and mouth cavity. So it's just basically a fancy word for the throat above the larynx. The nasopharynx specifically refers to the part of the pharynx that goes into the nasal cavity, excuse me, and above the soft palate. And we're going to get into the palate right now, and you'll be able to find some of this stuff. So the nasopharynx extends from the base of the skull to the top of the soft palate and out through the nose. So this upper part of the cavity. Palate is the roof of your mouth. And it is made up of both the soft palate and the hard palate. So let's take a minute to define those and find them. The hard palate is the bony plate located on the roof of your mouth. So if you take your tongue, place it right behind your front teeth, and then run your tongue down the center, that ridge, that bony ridge, and the bones that go to either side, that is the hard palate. And the reason that it is important to singing is it's a hard surface that the sound waves interact with. So depending on how you position it, it's going to affect your tone. And you're also probably going to feel quite a bit of sympathetic vibration in that part of the face if you're resonating in a really forward, masky way. You're going to feel some buzz in your teeth, maybe right behind your teeth, that mustache area of the face, okay? The soft palate, coming up here, the soft palate is the soft tissue at the back of the roof of your mouth. So if you do that again, where you run your tongue down that ridge, as soon as that bony part ends and you find that kind of squishy, fleshy, muscular part at the back of the throat, that is the soft palate. And the soft palate is a huge tool for singers. It's very important for us to understand how it works and to know that you actually have a peripheral bit of control over this. So you do not have to be able to like, you may not be aware that you can move this muscle, but you can if you really like learn to connect the brain and body. So really quickly, let's take a yawn. I'm going to go ahead and kind of fake one, which usually gets me to do a real one. And then usually we'll get anybody watching to kind of sympathetically take on that yawn. So let's try a yawn. All right. Oh, that feeling toward the like 2/3 to 3/4 mark of a yawn where the back of the mouth really stretches and pulls up. And it's also kind of where you might feel inclined to make that sighing sound. Okay, that looks ridiculous. The things I do for education. So the soft palate there, we are able to actually move that. And as a singer, now that I'm really aware of that muscle and I've used it for a long time, I can actually like raise one side then the other. Like I can play with it. Okay, so I want you to play around there. And the thing that's important to know about why it matters at all that we can control that muscle and move that part of our body is, again, it's one of our resonating chambers. So the way that the sound wave hits it and how much space or little space is in the mouth, depending on how you position it, is going to affect the vocal tone. It's going to make it either sound more nasal, or it's going to make it sound more bassy, more resonant, all those things. So basically, if it's raised up really high, like in that yawning sensation, you're directing airflow through the mouth, okay, which also directs sound through the mouth. And this is another really amazing thing that our body does, which is that when we yawn and we open our mouth so wide, that lift happens to prevent any like debris, food, or anything going up into the nasal cavity while we've got our mouth really wide open like that. So it's another kind of self-maintaining protective mechanism that we have in this incredibly complicated and complex system here. So when it's raised, it allows airflow and sound to come through the mouth. Ah, ah. And notice if I plug my nose when I do that, not much disturbance of the sound will happen because there's not really much of a sound wave coming through my nose. It's all being directed through the mouth. Ah, ah. Okay. Now, if I lower that soft palate and I continue to make a sound, I'm going to say ah, ah. Oh, look at that. Ah. So when I lower it, more airflow can go between the soft palate and go through the nose. If I do something like an NG sound, which is the soft palate lowered plus the tongue on the roof of the mouth, like sing. This is making me sniffly. If I do the word sing, notice I almost can't do it if I plug my nose because so much of the airflow is being directed out the nose that I could almost sing. Like it makes me not really be able to produce sound, okay? So the soft palate, I missed a bold here. This vocal tract should have a bold definition. That's a new concept here. The vocal tract is the cavity through which the sound travels from the larynx. So it's just the track on which the vocal flows. It's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, really. It's just a kind of another name for the throat above here. And it is made up of the laryngeal cavity, the pharynx, which we talked about, but from the throat up, the oral cavity, and the nasal cavity, okay? And that is basically where the sound is gonna come out and get filtered and manipulated by the conditions on the vocal tract. The articulators are your lips, cheeks, tongue, and soft palate. They filter the sound even further and interact with it to strengthen or weaken the sound source. So, wow. Lips, teeth, tongue, cheeks, lips, cheeks, tongue, soft palate. We can move these things around to really filter out high and low frequencies from a sound and basically adjust our vowel. The resonators, these are very important, and we're going to spend more time on resonating in this series a little bit later that will be dedicated specifically to this topic because this is the big one for singers. This is what makes singing in a really powerful way safe. And it also resonates with other people, right? When we resonate our voice, it actually sends out a vibration that is pleasing to others, and it kind of calls people in. And that, I know you've experienced that in music before, if not in singing, maybe in someone else's singing. And that's what makes you go, oh, wow. So resonance is very important. And resonators, the resonation itself is happening in the pharynx, the oral cavity, the nasal cavity. And basically what's happening is it's a second vibrator that is put in motion by and in tune with the source vibration. So that is one way of saying that when the vocal cords vibrate in a certain way, it makes a particular pitch happen because we stretch or shorten the cords. We adjust the setting in the larynx to create the right pitch. And then we put the right air pressure and compression together, and these pitches happen. However, the sound that you recognize as my voice and the sound that you recognize as human speech and singing in general is more a result of the resonators. The actual larynx mechanism itself just kind of creates a vibration of a buzz, like almost like a trumpet player's lips, just, which I can't do, but just kind of a buzzy sound, right? So this is where it gets really important, because if you let those cords do too much of the work, we get into trouble. That's where you fatigue and you wear out and you damage the voice over long-term misuse. So what we really need is for the vibrations here to create a sound wave that comes up and interacts in such a way that you feel sympathetic vibration in the head or in the chest, behind the eyes, okay? So really in the pharynx is in the throat. We do have some resonant space here. We have a lot of resonant space in the mouth and a little bit in the nose and the bridge. So really quick, I want you just to find that with a hum. I want you just to go, and notice I've got a little space here. I'm not going with my lips tight together. My lips are very light. I've got my eyebrows up and my chin and my jaw dropped, even though my mouth is closed. Creating that vertical length. And I want you to do that and feel your lips and see if you can sense that vibration in the lips and maybe in the teeth. Good. That, if you are able to find that buzz, that is your resonation happening. And that, in this case, is the mouth cavity that is vibrating in tune with, at the same frequency as your sound wave, okay? And that is your amplification. If you can get those other parts of your body to start buzzing, it's gonna boost those sound waves and make them louder and bigger and more rich and provide them with more harmonics and overtones. So that is essentially what singing is all about. The resonation is key to life. Okay, we talked about this just briefly already, and we're gonna wrap it up here. We're almost at the 30-minute mark, so I wanna let you go, but this stuff is all crucial to know as a singer, so I'm glad you're sticking with me here. Vocal registers or registration, you've probably heard of chest voice and head voice. There's also the words belt and mix, falsetto, vocal fry, whistle tone. They all refer to registration, and there's some debate about this in the voice teacher community, what's proper, what's not. As far as voice science goes, there are 4 distinct patterns or like ways in which the vocal cords vibrate. And those are your natural voice, which is also known as your modal voice. And that's like where I'm speaking right now. It's kind of that speech level, mid to low range, natural voice. Vocal fry, I demonstrated earlier. It's that under-energized passing of air through the cords. We do it a lot in California. Falsetto is a tricky one to define. In men, that's that voice that's really, really high up. It's when your cords are stretched so thin and vibrating so quickly that they don't even fully touch one another. It's like, it's a false closure of the cords, if you will. My understanding of falsetto is, to be perfectly frank, not the best. I'm still doing my research there. And then whistle tone is like this Mariah Carey nonsense that is pretty incredible when people can do it. Most people cannot do it, but it is one of the 4 distinct vibratory patterns available in the human voice. So not everyone can do it, but it is one of the 4. As far as voice teaching is concerned, generally in men, we refer to the registers as chest voice, head voice, falsetto. So kind of chest being that squeaky low range, the head voice being in here, and the falsetto kind of living up here at the crown center. And in women, we tend to call that chest voice, middle voice, or mix, and head voice, which is up here in the head. People ask the difference between belting and mixing. And again, this is not consensus among teachers, but my understanding and the way that I like to teach it is that belting is a more TA muscle dominant sound. So the thyroid muscle is engaged. You've got shorter, thicker chords. It's got a lot more robustness, a lot more, it's like on the edge of shouting almost, a thicker sound and with a lot of oomph. It can be pretty dangerous to sing in that style. So it's important to learn to belt properly. And then the mixed voice to me lives more in that middle voice, and it lives in almost a head voice setting. So it's like if you're setting up to sing in the head voice, so a more CT dominant sound, and then you're kind of reinforcing that voice with your middle voice, your kind of high speaking voice right up in here. Hey, oh, hi, right? Ba 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 ba, ba ma ma ma, mo, hey, it's kind of bratty, kind of bright. And even though it's got a lot of power because you're resonating it in the mask, it is still set up with the CT dominant structure versus TA. So that's how I define the difference between belt and mix. And then as far as vocal register is concerned, you've probably experienced them a lot, which is in your vocal break. So no matter what you're calling each voice or where you think of it in the body, that stuff is kind of subjective, to be honest. What's really important to know is that what a register refers to is like this set of notes that you can sing in one vocal condition before it falls apart and you have to like change gears, right? So, and there's that little flip in there, that set of notes that exists before your voice has to change into a different function refers to one register. And the registers do overlap. So there could be almost even an octave that you could sing in chest voice and you could sing in middle voice, and probably some of that would even exist in the head voice or falsetto. So they do overlap, which means it's good news for you. You have choices. So that's what's kind of fun about this, is when you start to figure this stuff out and what it feels like to use chest voice versus head voice versus mixed voice versus a belt, and you kind of get those sensations down, then you start to realize that on any given note in a range, you may have up to 3 choices on how to deliver it, depending on where you place it, how much compression you give it, and if you're giving it more TA or more CT muscle engagement. Okay. I'm going to let you go. Thank you for hanging with this long one, but I can't have a whole series called Love Your Larynx without telling you what the fuck is your larynx. It's the voice box. And I hope you love yours and take care of it, because you only get one. It's made of flesh. It is irreplaceable. And it is your unique fingerprint as a human voice. No one is like you. I love you and your larynx. My name is Carissa. I will see you next time. And I hope you really enjoyed today's presentation and that you learned a lot. See you soon.